Yeah, of course.
We're getting on like a storm, aren't we, Clive?
Yes.
In fact, I might just leave.
Yeah.
He didn't speak a word, not when the joke started, not when his brother's voice tightened, not even when Barry stood up, called the host a name, and walked off the stage. Robin Gibb just sat there, quiet, tense, unreadable. But if you watch closely, his silence said everything. It wasn't indifference, it wasn't confusion, it was control. Because if Robin Gibb had opened his mouth that night, on that live television set, he might not have walked out quietly. He might have exploded. The Bee Gees' 1997 walkout from a BBC talk show became one of the most talked about moments in British television. Everyone remembers Barry's exit. Some remember Maurice's awkward glance. But what most people miss is the moment right before it all fell apart, when Robin clenched his jaw, narrowed his eyes, and swallowed something dark. This wasn't just another awkward interview. It was the revival of years of emotional warfare, the kind Robin had been trained to survive in silence. So why didn't he say anything? What was really going through his mind as the jokes kept coming? And how many years of heartbreak was he holding back that night? You're about to hear the truth, told not through Robin's words, but through what he didn't say. Because when the world laughed at his family again, Robin Gibb didn't crack. He boiled. For stories that reveal the pain, strength, and silence behind music's legends, subscribe to Retro Waves. These are the moments no one explains, until now. It was supposed to be simple. A TV interview, a comeback album, a lighthearted chat to promote a project they were proud of. The Bee Gees were in their late 40s, freshly rejuvenated with the success of Still Waters. A soulful, heartfelt return to form that had been years in the making. The music was introspective, the tone was mature. This was not a disco gimmick. It was a reintroduction, and the world was beginning to listen again. So when they were booked for Clive Anderson All Talk, a British talk show known for sarcasm and satire, the brothers agreed without hesitation. They respected the host, they expected some teasing, but they also expected decency. From the moment they stepped onto that stage, the tone was off. Clive Anderson opened with backhanded compliments, quickly turning to outright ridicule.
It's that high-pitched...
Oh, the falsetto.
That's it, yes, yeah. Were you working with Mickey Mouse at the time?
He mocked Barry's falsetto, called them the Sisters Gibb, took digs at their song titles, and repeatedly interrupted answers with sarcastic jokes aimed at the heart of their identity.
Yeah.
No, he got his voice from me, I'm afraid.
Yeah. Was it just the tight jeans?
No, it was Aretha Martin.
Barry tried to stay calm. Maurice gave nervous chuckles. And Robin? He stared, expressionless, still, silent. His body was rigid. His eyes tracked every word, every smirk, every insult. He didn't lean into the banter. He didn't force a smile. He waited. Because Robin Gibb wasn't just reacting to the host, he was replaying every time this had happened before, every moment the Bee Gees had been mocked, erased, or laughed off as punchlines. And this time, it wasn't going to be forgiven so easily. Robin Gibb had never been the loudest Bee Gee. His voice, sharp, nasal, trembling with emotion, was unmistakable in song. But offstage, Robin was quieter, more introspective. He could be blunt, even confrontational when provoked. But in interviews, he often let Barry lead. That night, Robin took a back seat, at first. He watched as the jokes began piling up, the falsetto cracks, the dismissive tone, the disrespect. He saw Barry stiffen, saw Maurice glance nervously between them. And still, Robin said nothing. But his silence wasn't passive. He was listening, studying, measuring. Robin had always been the most emotionally raw of the three. He didn't have Barry's smooth diplomacy or Maurice's comic timing. But what he had, especially in times of pressure, was laser focus. And what he saw that night disgusted him. He had already buried one brother. He had already survived the death of Andy, survived years of public ridicule, survived addiction, grief, internal band conflicts, and being pushed aside by critics who barely gave them credit for their own songs. Now, here they were, back on top, only to be treated like a novelty act again. Robin clenched his fists beneath the table and waited. Robin Gibb was no stranger to speaking out. In past interviews, he had defended the Bee Gees fiercely, calling out the press, radio stations, and critics who dismissed their work. He knew how to fight back. But on this particular night, he didn't. And that choice was deliberate, because Robin understood something that not everyone watching did. Words wouldn't help. If he spoke, it wouldn't be witty, it wouldn't be calm, and it wouldn't be good for television. He could feel his chest tighten with every line the host delivered, every smirk. Every time Clive Anderson turned to the audience for approval after another insult, Robin bit his tongue. He wasn't just angry, he was insulted. He had lost too much, seen too much, lived through too much to sit and play along. And so, instead of fighting with words, he waited for Barry, because when Barry finally stood, when he dropped the final line and walked off, Robin knew exactly what to do. He rose and walked, no hesitation, no goodbye, and still, no words. To understand Robin's silence, you have to understand the history he was carrying. Robin was the twin of Maurice, the brother he had harmonized with since they were children. Their voices were practically fused. But unlike Maurice, who dealt with discomfort through humor, Robin internalized everything. For decades, the Bee Gees had been easy targets. Even after dominating the 1970s, breaking records with Saturday Night Fever, and writing more hits than almost any band alive, they were treated like disco dinosaurs. Radio stopped playing them, television mocked them, critics erased them from serious conversation. And Robin Gibb, who had poured his pain into every note of "I Started a Joke," "Run to Me," Massachusetts, was forced to smile through it. On that stage, as the same old jokes were recycled in real time, he felt it all rush back. The record burnings, the cancellations, the years they were laughed out of award shows, the journalists who acted like they didn't write their own songs. And now, this? A smug TV host using their second chance to entertain a laughing crowd. Robin could feel the temperature in his body rising, but he wouldn't give the host a reaction. He wasn't going to raise his voice. He was going to leave. When Barry delivered the final blow, "You're the tosser, pal."
Oh, I've never had anyone walk out before, but...
We are a tosser, pal.
Robin didn't flinch. He didn't glance at the host. He didn't try to stop his brother. He stood up, calm, controlled, done, and followed him off stage. That moment, barely a second of footage, said everything you needed to know about Robin Gibb. He may not have spoken, but his actions were absolute. He could have stayed seated, played the part, smiled politely, and finished the interview for the sake of professionalism, but he didn't, because this wasn't about PR. It was about dignity. And Robin wasn't going to let Barry walk alone. They had been through too much, lost too much, rebuilt too much. To stay there would have been a betrayal, not just of his brother, but of everything they had fought for. Robin chose silence over sarcasm and loyalty over laughter. Robin walked out with his brothers, head held high, jaw still clenched. He never spoke a word on that set, but his silence came at a cost. Robin was never the media darling. He didn't soften his edges for the press. He wasn't the Bee Gee known for small talk. Instead, he carried an undercurrent of grief and defiance, an artist shaped by personal loss, media betrayal, and decades of being misunderstood. And that night on Clive Anderson All Talk, he was reminded once again that the world hadn't really changed. It didn't matter how many albums they sold, how many lives their songs touched. The Bee Gees were still being treated like a joke. Robin Gibb's silence wasn't submission, it was resistance. Because sometimes saying nothing is louder than screaming, and Robin had screamed before. But that night, he chose to rise and leave with grace. And when the doors closed behind them, it wasn't just an interview that ended. It was Robin's final tolerance for being disrespected. In the days that followed, the headlines focused on Barry's line. The clip replayed over and over again. Fans speculated, journalists analyzed, but very few asked about Robin. He didn't grant interviews about the walkout. He didn't offer statements or explanations. He simply moved on. But those who knew Robin understood what the silence meant. It wasn't about damage control. It was about protecting something deeper. Robin Gibb had seen too many moments like that. He had experienced the Bee Gees being reduced to punchlines, even as they quietly shaped pop music from behind the curtain. He had written hits for others, sung lead on some of their most emotional ballads, helped build a sound that was imitated across generations, and still, he was told to laugh along as if none of it mattered. After that night, Robin carried himself a little differently. He became more protective of their legacy, more private, more cautious. Because that interview wasn't just one bad night, it was a reflection of something deeper. The world didn't want to hear their story, they wanted to laugh at it. Robin wasn't going to allow that anymore, not without consequences. Robin's contribution to the Bee Gees was never about being the loudest voice in the room. It was the way he held emotion in his vocals, the pain he poured into every syllable, the balance he brought between Barry's smooth confidence and Maurice's easy charm. He was the soul of the group, and sometimes the conscience. When things fractured within the band, Robin was often at the center of it. He and Barry had their battles, some public, some private. But beneath it all was a bond built not just on music, but survival. Robin had nearly left the Bee Gees in the late 1960s. He had felt overlooked, isolated. And when he returned, it was only because he believed in what they could still build, together. He stayed, he fought, he wrote, he sang, and he endured. The media rarely gave Robin credit for that. He wasn't flashy, he didn't court attention, but without Robin Gibb, the Bee Gees would never have had their emotional spine. That night, when Barry walked out and Morris followed, Robin's silence was the closing note. A brother who had nothing left to prove, a man who had already lost too much, and who, in that moment, refused to lose his self-respect. For years after the walkout, Robin Gibb never publicly addressed it in depth. He didn't write a memoir about it. He didn't go on talk shows to justify it. He didn't rehash the humiliation. He didn't need to. Because what mattered most wasn't what happened on stage. It was what happened when the Bee Gees stood up and walked away. Robin had spent decades learning how to control his temper, how to keep his mouth shut when everything inside him wanted to erupt. He had seen how one bad moment could be twisted by the media and turned against them. So he didn't give them one. He gave them silence, controlled, measured, heavy. It was more powerful than any quote. Because Robin understood something few people do. Sometimes your greatest power isn't what you say. It's what you refuse to say. That night, the world saw a quiet man walk off a loud stage. But what they really saw was a man who had been holding the line for far too long and decided enough. Behind Robin's silence that night was a lifetime of grief. He had lost his youngest brother Andy to addiction and depression. He had fought through his own struggles with substance use and mental health. He had been pushed out of the spotlight, questioned by record labels, mocked by critics, and forced to watch the band he loved become a cultural joke. He had lost control of his career at times. He had lost friends, trust, years. And yet, he had stayed. He had come back. He had rebuilt what was broken, but not without scars. When Clive Anderson made those jokes on live TV, they weren't just jabs at Barry. They were jabs at everything the brothers had endured. And Robin, who had buried more pain than most could imagine, sat there quietly, absorbing it, until his brother stood up. And without blinking, Robin followed. Because if there's one thing Robin Gibb understood better than anyone, it was loyalty. That moment wasn't rage, it was protection of his brothers, his family, his legacy, and of the silence that said, "We're done here. Robin Gibb didn't need applause that night. He didn't need credit for holding back. He just needed to leave the room. The Bee Gees had always been about survival, reinvention, harmony through conflict. But that night proved something even deeper. They were still united, still loyal, still brothers. Robin's silence wasn't weakness, it was strength, a strength he had built over decades of being ignored, mocked, dismissed, and still showing up. He had nothing to prove to Clive Anderson, or the audience, or the media. Robin Gibb knew who he was, and he knew when to speak, and more importantly, when not to. That walkout didn't define him, but it did reveal him. To those who watched closely, it showed the storm he carried in his chest, and the discipline it took not to let it out. Robin Gibb never said a word during that infamous interview, but in his silence, you could hear everything. If this story moved you, subscribe to Retro Waves for more untold truths behind music's most powerful moments.